My entitled mother demanded that I hand over my paycheck to her because she saw how much money I was making after graduating college. My mom always told me that she was raising me to be the best child because she thought I would do better. My mom was much harder on me than on my little brother about my grades, sports, academic clubs, looks, and personal life. I have to say that when I was young, I hated my little brother because he was always free, and I was always stuck inside. I was always kept in check. I had more than one job so I could save money for college and help pay the bills for my family. When my brother got a job, he could buy what he wanted with the money. My mom told me what I should do with my life, who I should marry, and how she will move in with me after I buy my house to help me raise the kids and take care of her. At one point, my mom would spend money on designer items while we slept in hotels and cars. I did not like being poor. As a child, all I wanted was a house. For us, a nice, small, nice house. If I dated someone my mom did not think was good enough for me, she would do everything she could to ruin the relationship. Well, I went to law school and was working on my JD when I met the man I am now dating. When you know, as the saying goes. We knew right away, by golly. After 3 days, he moved me in, and we have not been apart since. I care about his family, and they care about me, too. He grew up in the upper middle class and had great parents. He was also the best student in law school, and he just seemed too good to be true. My mom disagreed. She did not like him at all because every time she tried to sound smart, he corrected her and told her she was wrong. She was given facts and even shown where they came from. Oh, she does not like being wrong. I told my boyfriend about how my mom raised me and what she wants from me as I get older. He was not going to let it happen. He even said that she would be lucky to meet her grandchildren. My mom's plans for me and my new boyfriend started to fall apart, so she tried to break us up several times. When she made fun of his parents, he said that was enough. He told her we were done with her and called her out. My mom was really scared at this moment. I was her meal ticket. She told me I had to choose between my own mother and a man I had been seeing for a year. Of course, I chose the guy. My mom had never faced anyone who fought back before and has lived in fear all these years. The day after we broke up, my dad and brother were in an accident. The police report stated that dad was drunk driving and ran a red light. My father died instantly. My brother passed away 2 weeks later. I remember sitting there waiting for them to come home and getting the call instead. My mom blamed herself. She said that if she had been nicer, or if she had not pushed me to marry sooner, my brother would still be alive today. She said that she was a horrible person. I think that is why she did not want me to date until after I got married. It was her way of coping with the death of my brother. When I moved in with my boyfriend, she stopped paying my bills and gave me a curfew. I told her I was living on my own and that she could not tell me what to do anymore. She agreed to stop, but it only lasted a few months. Every time I turned around, she was there to bother me. I asked her to leave, and she refused. I finally had enough and kicked her out of my apartment. She begged me to give her another chance. I told her no, and then I took my brother's engagement ring and put it in my purse. Then I walked outside. I looked down at my hand. I felt a cold chill go through me, and I knew I had made a terrible mistake. I picked up the phone and called my boyfriend. I told him to come get me, and I left. I told my mother that I did not need her help anymore and that I wanted nothing to do with her. I went back to my boyfriend's place and cried. When he asked what was wrong, I told him that I was pregnant. My boyfriend held me tight and said, "Oh no, what are we going to do?" He was so worried. That night, I found out I was having twins. My boyfriend and I became closer than ever after that. I think he understood me more than any other man I had met. My mom called me every day after that. She even sent me letters telling me how much she loved me. I ignored her completely. Finally, she stopped calling. When I found out I was pregnant, I told my boyfriend that I did not want to have children with my mom in my life. He and my sister were my family now. I also told him that I wanted to name my children after my father and brother. He agreed, and we decided on Trevor and Rachel. They will grow up knowing their relatives and will have a loving uncle and aunt. A few months ago, I realized something. I was in love with my boyfriend. I fell in love with his family, too. I had so many happy memories there. I have 2 beautiful baby boys who are growing up with the most amazing family. My mother is not in my life, and I am fine with that. I do miss her sometimes, but she hurt me so much, I can't bring myself to forgive her. She will never see my children, and I hope she will one day find happiness. Mom, don't. My daughter yelled as she rushed forward to stop me. She tugged at my arm. Just listen, I said, and continued pacing toward the door of her room. They're making me move to a smaller house, and I'll have less space. But you have your own room here, my daughter reminded me. It's the principle of the thing. I'm sure it's just temporary, and once my husband gets a new job, we'll be able to afford somewhere else. Why didn't you ask me? You're only 12, and I know you'd rather stay with friends than with your parents. Besides, I'm your mother. You should want to help me. I've always been there for you. We're supposed to help each other, not make things worse, my daughter said. I'm sorry, honey. Please tell me what I can do to fix this problem. I pleaded with her and pulled her into a hug. I know it's not fair, but you're the one who told me when I moved in, life isn't fair, and it's not about that. It's about you needing to be happy, and I don't want you to be sad. I'm not sad. I just wish we could stay together. Can you imagine if we lived in the same neighborhood? Your friends would come over to see me, and we'd have playdates. I even have cousins nearby. What kind of life would you have?" She wiped away her tears, and I hugged her again. "I won't be far away. I promise. And we can always visit," I promised, and kissed her forehead. "Okay, Mom. I'll try to understand. I love you," she said, and I wiped her tears away. "Love you too, sweetheart. Now go and enjoy your last weekend." As I closed her bedroom door behind me, I heard her sobbing. I paused. She was trying so hard to be strong, and I hated it. She was only 12, and already she was dealing with adult problems. She needed me now more than ever, but I couldn't be there for her. I had no choice. I was being forced to move, and I had to find a job soon. It wasn't long before I heard a knock on my front door. I opened it, and my oldest son stood in the hallway with his hands in his pockets. He looked like a teenager, tall and lanky. He was 16 and starting high school next week. His brown hair hung over his eyes, and he scratched at it nervously. He looked older than his age. I wondered how that happened. It seemed like yesterday when I brought him home from the hospital. He was just a baby, and now he was taller than me. "Hey, buddy," I said, and patted his head. "What's up?" "I'm going to miss our house," he said, sounding depressed. "And you?" "I know, and I'm sorry." "I heard what's happening," he said, and handed me an envelope. "I packed some clothes for you. There's one of my favorite shirts and a pair of jeans. My mom said she'd drop them off at the new house tomorrow. I don't want you to have to live without your stuff. You're our mom, our real mom." "Well, thank you," I said, feeling overwhelmed. He didn't have to do this. He could have just taken my side. But he was such a good boy. I hugged him tight and wiped away his tears. "I'll miss you, too," I said, and watched as he walked away. That night, I sat on my bed and stared at the envelope. I thought about how much he must care for me to do this. How could he possibly care so deeply? My husband and I had separated a few months earlier, and I hadn't seen or spoken to my kids in weeks. But they still cared about me enough to pack my things and take them to the new place. I tucked the letter into my pocket and paced back and forth in the small room. It was time for me to start packing. I had to leave tonight, and I had to find a job. It was all so overwhelming. 1 month later, I was in the car with my kids heading toward the new house. My daughter kept asking me questions, and my son was quiet. I knew it was because he was sad. I tried to answer her questions, but they weren't helping much. So, I tried to keep things light by looking at the houses we drove past. I noticed a sign next to one of the houses and pointed it out to her. "Do you see that?" I asked her. "It says for sale. Do you think we could buy that house? It looks nice." "Yeah, Mom," my daughter said enthusiastically. "But we won't be able to afford it. Maybe we can find something cheaper," I said. "Let's look around." I parked the car in the driveway and got out. My daughter followed close behind me, and my son came along slowly. We walked up the steps and rang the doorbell. A woman answered, and I introduced myself. Her name was Mrs. Green, and she lived there with her husband, John. They had 4 teenage kids who were now out of the house. "Please come inside," she said warmly, and ushered us in. "I'm so glad you came." "Thank you, Mrs. Green," I said, and looked around the large living room. The furniture was old, but comfortable. "What's your name again?" she asked. "Karen," I said. "Call me Mary, please," she said, and smiled at me. "Now, let me show you around." She led us into the kitchen, which was clean and neat. The floor was tiled, and the walls were painted a pale yellow. In the center of the wall, I saw a picture of her husband's father. He was standing next to a football player. "Was he a famous quarterback?" I asked, and she laughed. "No, he was a star baseball player. He played for the Yankees, and he helped win 3 World Series," she said proudly. I told him he could retire early, but he had a competitive spirit. He wanted to play until he was 40 years old, but he died at 33. He was killed in a car accident. I nodded as she told me the story. "I took his spot on the team," Mary said. "I was a shortstop, and I had a great glove. I was offered a contract from both teams, but I chose the Yankees. They were the best team in the league. Besides, my husband grew up a Yankees fan, and he wanted me to play for his favorite team." "Wow, that's awesome," my daughter exclaimed. "When I first started playing, I wasn't very good. Some of the fans booed me. I didn't know what to do. But then, one day, I met a young girl who supported me. Her name was Katie. She was 11 at the time, and she cheered me on every single game. She showed everyone in the stadium that we could cheer each other on, even if we were different colors." "Katie sounds like a wonderful person," I said, and looked at my daughter. Then I turned back to Mary. "How did you meet her?" "She used to stand up in the bleachers and scream for me. I would wave back at her, and she'd give me a thumbs up. One day, I ran to her when she called my name. I grabbed her hand, and we became friends right away. After a while, we started dating. We married after college, and we moved to this city together." "So, does it bother you that she's white?" my daughter asked, and Mary shook her head. "Not really. I mean, we were both raised in the same neighborhood, and we went to the same schools. I don't think there will be any problems between us. Will there be?" I asked her, and she gave me a funny look. "You mean, will she care?" "No, nothing like that. My husband, John, has 4 kids. 2 are black, and 2 are white, and they get along just fine. You know, it's not a big deal anymore. People aren't judged based on their skin color. I nodded and took a deep breath. My daughter squeezed my hand and I looked at her. I was so proud of her. She was growing up so fast. She was becoming a beautiful young lady and she had a good heart. We toured the rest of the house and Mary explained how it worked. The bedrooms were upstairs and there was another full bathroom on the second floor. The basement was unfinished, but had plenty of storage space. She also showed us how to use the alarm system and instructed us on where everything was located. I thanked her for letting us see the house, and then we left. Well, that was fun, my daughter said, and laughed. Can we stop at the mall? Sure, I said, and smiled at her. I've never been to a mall before. I can't wait to see it. My son looked upset, and I guessed he'd heard us talking about him. I didn't say anything to him, though. Instead, I led the way to the car and climbed inside. Soon, my daughter started singing, and soon we were driving toward the mall. I tried not to worry about the money. It was all going to work out somehow. As long as my kids were happy, that's all I cared about. The next morning, I woke up late. My daughter was sitting on the edge of my bed staring at me. She looked worried, and I rubbed my eyes. "Good morning, Mom," she said. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thanks." She leaned forward and kissed my cheek. Then she got up and walked to the bathroom. I stretched and waited for my son to wake up. When he finally roused himself, he came over and held my hand. "Morning, Mom," he said. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, and kissed his forehead. "What do you want to do today?" I don't know," he said, and picked at his fingernails. "I guess we could go shopping." "Sounds like a plan," I said. We spent the entire day walking around the mall. My daughter fell in love with a pair of jeans and bought them. My son ended up buying a shirt and a hoodie. We stopped for lunch and I treated him to pizza. Afterward, we wandered down the street to a bookstore. I loved reading, and I taught my kids how to read at an early age. It was one of my favorite things to do. While we were browsing the books, my son found a book he liked. He ran to the counter and paid for it. "Mom," he said, smiling, "for your birthday." "Oh my God," I gasped and cried. "That's so sweet of you." "Come on," he said, and pulled me toward the exit. "It's raining outside, so let's stay dry." As we walked to the car, I felt like $1,000,000. My kids made me feel special, and I was so thankful for that. "Are you ready?" I asked, and looked at my daughter. She nodded and smiled at me. "Okay, let's go." We drove to the beach, and the sun was setting. We walked along the shoreline and listened to the waves crashing against the rocks. My kids played in the sand, and I watched them running around happily. I couldn't believe how much they had grown since we arrived here. They were such great kids. Suddenly, they stopped in front of me. They were staring intently at something, and I followed their gaze. There was a young man sitting alone on the sand. He looked hurt, and I wondered what had happened to him. I didn't know anyone down here, and I didn't recognize him. "Is that your friend?" my daughter asked, and I nodded. "He looks sad," my son said. "Should we go say hi?" "Why don't you guys go say hello?" I said. "I'll watch them from here." "Okay," they agreed, and started walking toward the young man. Before they reached him, I saw him smile at my daughter. Her face lit up, and she waved at him. He stood up, and they hugged each other tightly. Then, my son joined them, and they all talked for a minute before my daughter invited him to come over to our blanket. He grinned at me and then followed her. After a while, he went back to the water and began playing in the sand. My daughter sat next to him, and they started building castles. My son was nearby, throwing stones into the ocean. I watched them play for a few minutes, and then I walked toward the water. I walked along the beach and saw a seagull perched on the rocks near the shore. I walked closer, and it eyed me warily before flying away. I glanced around, but didn't see anything else interesting. Then, I saw something moving on the horizon. I squinted and saw a group of dolphins swimming in the distance. They glided through the sea with grace, and I smiled at them. Then, I looked around again and saw a small wooden sign sticking out of the sand. I walked over and picked it up. On the sign was carved a dolphin leaping out of the water. Someone had placed it there for someone else to find. Whoever put it there knew how much I loved dolphins, and that I had just moved here. I was touched by the gesture, and it made me feel welcome. I sat down on the sand and watched the sunset. The sky was filled with bright pink and orange clouds, and I thought it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Then, I glanced over at my kids. My daughter was still building sandcastles, and my son was tossing rocks into the ocean. They were so happy, and I couldn't help but think that things would always be okay. A week later, we flew home to Pennsylvania. My kids were excited to see their grandparents, and I was thrilled to see snow. I hadn't seen any in years, and I loved it. "I'll bet you're glad we moved here," my mother said, as we drove to the airport. "Yeah, I am," my daughter said. "There's no snow back home." "You can build snowmen and make snow angels," my son added and giggled. "If there's enough snow," my mother said, "and it doesn't melt within a few days." "Where are we headed?" I asked, and looked at my mom. "Your sister is having a baby shower," she replied, and smiled at me. "Isn't that exciting?" "I guess," I sighed, and looked out the window. My brother-in-law greeted us and took us to the house. My sister was waiting for us when we arrived, and she jumped up from the couch as soon as we walked in. "Welcome back," she exclaimed. "How was Florida?" "It was nice," I said, "but it's good to be home." "Let me take your bags inside," my sister said, and took my suitcase. She smiled at me and led me into the living room. "I'm so glad you came. I haven't seen my niece yet. She's beautiful," I exclaimed and smiled. "Look at those cheeks. She's adorable." "Thanks," my sister said and kissed my cheek. "I can't believe you met Katie. I'm so happy for you." I laughed and nodded. "Me too." We chatted for a little while, and then my mother came in. She walked over to us and peered into the baby's crib. "This is so cute," she said. "I can't wait until she grows up. She's going to be such a pretty girl." "Are you sure you're not having a boy?" I asked and laughed. "Look at that hair. Girls have really thick hair." "No," my sister said and shook her head. "It's a girl, and her name is Riley." My mother looked surprised and my sister chuckled. "See what I mean?" "Of course," my mother said and patted my shoulder. "She's a gorgeous baby. I can't wait to hold her." "Mama, come here," my daughter cried and ran into the kitchen. "Riley wants you." My mother walked over to the crib and gazed down at my new niece. She cooed softly and bent down to kiss her forehead. My sister smiled at me, and then we all sat around the living room talking. My sister showed us photos of Riley, and we oohed and awed over everyone. Then, my mother asked if we wanted dinner, but we told her we'd already eaten. We stayed for another hour, and then we thanked my sister for inviting us over. We said goodbye to my brother-in-law, and he promised to keep my sister company while we were gone. Then, we got in the car and drove home. Once we arrived, my son helped my mother unpack the suitcases. My daughter and I went into my bedroom, and she crawled into the bed next to me. "She's so cute," my daughter gushed and smiled at me. "Can I hold her, please?" "Of course," I said and smiled. "You can hold her anytime you want." She snuggled close to me and I stroked her hair. For a moment, I forgot everything else and just enjoyed her closeness. Then, we heard the phone ring and I groaned. "It must be my dad," I sighed and got up to answer it. "Hello?" "Hi, honey," my father said, and his voice sounded tired. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," I said and hung up. "Someone's on the phone." "Who was it?" my daughter asked. "I don't know," I said and grabbed the receiver. "Hey, Dad. What's up?" "It's your grandfather," he said and sighed. "He's sick and he needs a surgery." "Oh," I said and felt my heart sink. "When did he get sick?" "Last night," he said. "His doctor called me this morning. He has cancer, and they need to remove part of his stomach." "Oh God." "Don't worry," my father said. "Everything will be fine. You two should fly down here to visit him. That way, he won't be alone." "Dad, I don't think we can do that," I said and hung up. My daughter was crying, and I sat next to her. "Why are you crying?" I asked, and wiped her tears away. "Grandpa's going to be okay. He'll get better and then we'll go visit him." She sniffled and nodded. I took her hand, and we both sat on the bed. After a while, she stopped crying and fell asleep. I stared at her for a long time, and then I turned off the light. I lay down and tried to sleep, but my thoughts kept racing. I worried about Grandpa, and I wondered what was going to happen to my family. I had been taking care of my parents for 5 years, but now that they had decided to move to Florida, I felt lost without them. In the morning, my mother woke me up and said I needed to get ready. I brushed my teeth and changed into a dress. Then, my mother drove me to the airport. When we arrived, she kissed me goodbye and wished me luck. I walked inside the airport and my heart raced. This was the first time I had left home alone, and I wasn't sure what to expect. I walked around and looked at some souvenirs. Then I bought a book and sat down to read it. An hour passed, and then a man approached me. He asked me where I was from, and I told him I was visiting relatives in Florida. I assumed he was a salesman or something, but he seemed harmless. We chatted for a while, and he offered to show me around town. I accepted and followed him outside. It was raining, and he held an umbrella over us while we walked to a nearby park. "So, tell me something about yourself," he said and smiled. "Do you have a boyfriend?" "No," I said. "Why?" "Well, you seem like a nice girl," he said. "Wouldn't you like to meet someone special?" "I do," I said and smiled. "But right now, I'm just enjoying myself. I don't need anyone else." He laughed and grabbed my hand. Then, he pulled me toward him and kissed me. I didn't resist because I was shocked by the suddenness of it. Then, I remembered that he was a stranger and pushed him away. "Who are you?" I asked. "Why did you kiss me?" "That's none of your business," he said and smirked. "You shouldn't be here. Go back to where you came from before I call the cops." "I'm sorry," I said and backed away. "Maybe I should leave." "Not yet," he said and grabbed my arm. "Come with me. I have a friend who owns a bar, and he has a guest room." He led me to an old rundown bar, and the owner welcomed us inside. He gave us each a beer, and we sat down at the bar. He didn't say anything and just watched us drink our beers. I could tell that he wanted to get closer to me, and after a while, he reached out to touch my face. "You're very beautiful," he whispered in my ear and then kissed me again. I pulled away and glared at him. "Stop it," I said and raised my voice. "Get away from me." The man stood up and pointed at me angrily. "You're disgusting," he shouted. "Go back to wherever you came from." "I don't know who you are," I said and wiped my mouth. "But you're not getting near me. This is my stop." I walked out and saw another man standing outside. "Excuse me," I said. "Could you please give me a ride home?" "Sure," he said, and leaned against his car. "Hop in." I climbed into the passenger side, and he drove me to my hotel. Then, he dropped me off and told me to be careful. I thanked him and got out of the car. My hands were shaking, and I wanted to cry. I dialed my father's number, and he picked up right away. "Are you okay?" he asked, and listened intently. "Did he hurt you?" "No," I said. "But he tried to force himself on me." "Okay," my father said. "Be careful next time. Remember, don't talk to strangers. Keep your guard up." I nodded and hung up. Then, I walked into the lobby and checked in. The clerk handed me 2 keys, and I opened the door to my room. I walked inside and closed the door behind me. Then, I locked it and took a deep breath. I couldn't help but feel scared. Why would someone try to assault me right there in public? What if he was waiting for me outside the hotel? I knew it was irrational, but I still felt vulnerable. All day long, I had worried about Grandpa, and now I was worried about myself. I took a shower and washed the smell of the man away with soap. Then, I put on a t-shirt and shorts and went downstairs for dinner. I sat at a table and waited for my food. A few minutes later, a waiter came over to take my order. "Can I start with a salad?" I asked and smiled. "And then I'll have a cheeseburger, fries, and a strawberry milkshake." "I'm sorry," the waiter said and looked at me. "We don't serve milkshakes anymore." "What do you mean?" I asked and frowned. "They used to sell milkshakes here because of the messes they caused," he said and sighed. "The last one broke the glass, and it cost us thousands of dollars to fix it." "I see," I said and looked out the window. "Is that why you're closing down?" "Yes," he said and smiled sadly. "It's cheaper to buy a new coffee shop than to fix the damage." I spent the rest of the evening reading a book in my room. Then I went to bed and slept soundly. In the morning, I checked out of the hotel and went sightseeing. After exploring the city, I went back to my hotel room and had dinner. Once I finished eating, I went to bed. My parents wouldn't be coming to visit me for another few days, so I was alone in the hotel. I thought about calling a friend, but decided not to. I didn't want anyone to know what happened to me. Instead, I stayed in my room and read until I fell asleep.